from a little town in upstate New York called Elmira, New York, and during the summertime the pool was open, the local, the city pool was open. And I was in there changing clothes one day, and there was a little gym. And there were these high school football players who were lifting weights. And they were screaming and yelling at each other. And I remember as a 7-year-old just sitting there being mesmerized by just the way they were yelling at each other and pushing each other. When I was 8 years old, a friend of mine told me, he goes, because I was telling him about this, he goes, "Oh, my brother's a weightlifter." And he goes, "We have a gym down in our cellar." So when I was 8, went over to his house, and I remember walking down the cellar, and his brother Franny, it was Franny Durante, and Franny was 16 years old, but when you're 8, a 16-year-old is a man, right? And Franny was standing in the corner. He was wearing jeans, and he wasn't wearing a shirt. And he's over there, and he's doing curls. And I remember looking at him and thinking, he looks just like Hercules. And I ran home, and I told my parents, look, all I want for Christmas is a set of weights. That's all I want is a set of weights. And I can still remember that Christmas when I was 9 years old, walking down the stairwell and looking under the Christmas tree. There was my 110-pound set of Mighty Mouse weights. I was so excited. I remember I ran upstairs to my bedroom. I got my cowboy bedspread off my bed, went down to the cellar, laid it out. Then I brought the weights down. I laid everything down, and then I had to read the directions because I'd never done it before. And it would show these different exercises, and it would say, do 3 sets of 8 repetitions and rest in between sets. So I remember I immediately ran out to the garage. I got a lounge chair, and I put it down. I put it next to my blanket, and my mother said, I remember she goes, "What's that for?" I said, "Well, it said you're supposed to sleep in between these exercises." And she was the one who set me straight. I was just supposed to rest, for a minute and go do it again. So, I started lifting in my cellar. Now there's 7 kids in my family and my parents. And if you went above the cellar, it was very loud, but the cellar was very, very quiet. And it just so happened there was this group. They had just come over from England. They were called the Beatles. And they had great music, and I went up to my sister's bedroom, and I took her record player, and I got 45s of the Beatles, playing, and I'd lift to the sound of the Beatles. And that was good for a while, but then that got to be kind of boring, so I decided that I was going to go out and get my 9-year-old friends and bring them down into my cellar and teach them how to lift weights, because at that point I'd been lifting for about 3 weeks, so I was pretty much an expert. And so I brought my other friends, my 9-year-old friends, down in the cellar. I teach them how you're supposed to lift weights, and I even knew as a 9-year-old that you're supposed to do, I didn't know the word cardiovascular, I knew we were supposed to work our hearts. So I used to make everybody run around the furnace, which made you more dizzy than anything, but I knew we were supposed to do that. And actually, I continued to keep lifting in my cellar until high school. And when I was a freshman in high school, I was too young, because I was always a year ahead. I was too young to play football. So I was going to just continue to lift weights. And there was this other kid in my class who lifted weights. And he was a member of the YMCA. So I said, "Fred, do you think I could go with you, to the Y one night?" And he said, "Sure." So I remember as a 13-year-old kid walking into this gym with these guys who were the size of cars, lifting weights, and I remember I was terrified walking in there, but I knew I wanted to get stronger, so I went in and started working out. And over the years, I started training with all of those guys, and I actually trained at the Y for 6 years. But obviously, I trained all through high school. I played sports getting into my 2nd year, but I trained all through high school. And now, when high school is coming to an end, you got to make decisions like, what am I going to be when I grow up? And my mother, who was always great, who used to always say to me, "By Friday, I want you to tell me what you're going to be." And I used to always tell her, "Mom, I don't know what I want to be the rest of my life. I can't tell you by Friday." But at the end of high school, trying to figure out what I was going to do, where I was going to go to college. And like I said, I played football, and I remember sitting at my kitchen table, and they had all these letters from small colleges all through upstate New York and Pennsylvania, trying to decide where I wanted to go. And I remember saying to my mother, I said, I don't think football is really in my future, so I don't think I should be picking a school based upon football. So I decided I wasn't going to go to any of those schools, that I was just going to go to a community college that was 25 miles from my hometown, a little town called Corning, New York. So I moved to Corning and went to school there, but there was no gyms up there. So I used to hitchhike home every single night, the 25 miles, and hitchhike back the 25 miles every single night. Now, are any of you from the north? Okay, you know, it's like when it's December, January, February, you know, you'd be staying in the freezing cold. I'd be hitchhiking out on the highways, and, you know, my biggest fear was my mother or father driving past me, who had no idea that every night I was coming to town and then leaving town again. There's sometimes when I walked most of the way, but I did it every single night. My second year, I found a Volkswagen for $75. It only had 3 of the 4 cylinders and it only went 45 miles an hour, but it beat walking, you know, and walking and hitchhiking. But now the second year of college is coming to a conclusion, and you really have to make a decision, like, what am I going to be? So remember, I narrowed it down to 2 things. One was police science, and I know why I did that, because I had worked out with cops, deputy sheriffs, or deputies, state troopers. I worked out with them for all those years, and I thought, you know, maybe I could be pretty good in that world. The other thing was physical therapy. I thought, you know, I've been training people, because I was teaching people how to work out, like I said, from when I was 9 years old. I thought, you know, maybe I'd be good as a physical therapist. So I remember I looked it up, and I said, you know, it was funny, because when I looked it up, I said, okay, if I get in the police world, and if I make it to the top, you know, how much money would you make? So I looked, and I saw a number. And then I thought about it. I said, you know, it's interesting. I don't know if I ever want to have a job where somebody tells me how much money I can make. I don't know why I thought that. I mean, I just thought that. Then I looked to see, okay, what if I got into physical therapy? And I looked to see, well, how much do physical therapists make? Well, they made a lot less than you did if I made it to the top in the police world. And I looked at that number, and I said, how about if I become a physical therapist, and then I'll learn business, whatever that means, and then eventually I'll buy a building and I'll fill it full of equipment, and then I'll go out and I'll hire a bunch of other physical therapists to come to work for me, and then I'd go out to the medical community, explain to them why they should send their patients to us, why we're better than everybody else. And I thought, you know, if the good thing about that is, if I succeed, it's because I made it succeed. And if it failed, it's because I made it fail. And I thought, you know, I like those odds. But it was right at that same time when a buddy of mine and I decided to do the proverbial, let's take 1 year off from college and travel around the country. So that was the plan, right up until the day we were going to leave, of which he then told me that he had just gotten a job with the city and he didn't want to go. Well, you know, here I am. I'm like ready, and no place, nobody to travel with. And I realized that I didn't want to go traveling around all America by myself. But there was a girl that I'd gone out with in New York who'd moved down to Gainesville. And I said, look, Teresa, we're not going to be traveling around the country, even though we were going to come here first and then move from here. I said, I'll come down to Gainesville. I'll spend 30 days in Gainesville, and then I'll go back to New York, go back to work, save some money, and then go back to college. So that was the plan. So it was actually October 27th, 1973. I got here about 4 o'clock in the morning. I went to where Teresa was living, spent the rest of the night there, got up the next day, and I knew I needed to work out. Well, she had a brother who lived here, and he was a member of the Steve Spurrier Health Spa. And so I said, Frank, do you think I could go with you and work out? So he said, sure. So I went and I worked out. And when I was done working out, I went to the manager, and I said, look, I'm only here for 30 days. I don't have any money to pay you to work out. I had like $400. And I said, but I'd be willing to work for free if you let me work out for free. And so he said, fine. So I worked as an instructor. I remember I worked Wednesday nights, and I worked all day Saturday, and I could train anytime I wanted to. But now it's coming to the end of the 30 days, and it was close to Christmas time. I thought, well, how about if I just stay here to Christmas time, and then I'll go back home. So I went to the manager, and I said, look, I'm going to stay for another 30 days. I said, but could you pay me this time? And I remember I was very excited because he paid me $1.90 an hour, of which everybody else was being paid like $1.65 an hour. So I thought I had shown him that I had done a pretty good job, in the 30 days that I was there. And it was interesting because my job as an instructor was to help people work out, and when people were interested in joining the health club, I'd walk them around, show them the whole place, talk to them about working out, and then I'd bring them back to one of the salespeople. And one of the things that I always noticed was nobody ever joined. And I went to the manager and I said, I walk these people around and they seem so excited about wanting to get back in shape again, but no one ever seems to make the decision to actually do it. And I said, do you think I could talk to them? Now, I was 19 at the time. He was about 40-something. And he looks at me, he goes, no, Joe, that's only for special people to do. So I looked at him. I thought he could tell whatever this quality was you're supposed to have. I didn't have. I mean, I didn't even question it. I go, oh, okay. So I continued to keep working as an instructor. But now it came up to Christmas time. Got my car. I actually had a new used Volkswagen that had 4 cylinders. And I drove back to New York for Christmas. Well, I was going to go to work with a friend of mine named Frankie Savino, who was a mason, and I was the laborer. And I said, we're going to start working? And he goes, Joe, look at it, it's so frozen up here. He goes, why don't you go back to that Gainesville place for like 90 more days, and then come back and the temperature will be warm enough that we can start working. So I said, okay. So I jumped in my car and I came back to Gainesville. What I didn't know was that the Steve Spurrier Health Spa was going out of business, and a company out of Utah was coming in to take them over, and it became called the Steve Spurrier Golden Door. So they had a new manager. Well, I continued to keep working as an instructor. About 3 weeks into January, the manager came to me. He says, Joe, I want to talk to you about getting involved in selling memberships. And I said, I thought that was like for special people or something. And I remember he said to me, he goes, well, I think you are. And he said, let me just show you what you need to do. So he explained to me how to fill out the paperwork and all. I can still remember the first guy I ever enrolled. His name was Randy Ratliff. And I remember I'm talking to Randy, and Randy is like, oh, I don't know. He was like hemming and hawing. I said, Randy, I want you to join. He goes, okay. And that was my first step. And but that day I sold 8 memberships. Just so happened the vice president of the company from out in Utah, he was actually a bishop in the Mormon church, he was in Gainesville, and a real good guy. And a guy by the name of John Carpenter. And he, at the end of the day, he goes, Joe, what are you doing for dinner? And I said, I don't have any plans. He goes, why don't you come out to dinner with me? And I said, okay. So we're sitting there and we're talking, and then he goes, you know, Joe, today was your first day in sales, right? And I said, yes. He goes, and you sold 8 memberships. I said, yeah. And he goes, you know, usually it would take months before a salesperson would ever sell 8 memberships in one day. He goes, but what bothers me the most is you don't seem excited about it at all. I remember looking at him and I said to him, it wasn't hard. I mean, because it wasn't. And, you know, it was always that moment in time when I look back, I realized that, you know, true sales comes from here. It doesn't come from here. And so when I talk to people about working out, it's not like I'm trying to convince you of something that I don't believe in. I mean, it's something I do and believe in, done my whole life. And that was what the difference was. But it just so happened right at that same time, I was sitting in an office and I opened up this drawer. There was this book in there called The Power of Positive Thinking by Dr. Norman Vincent Peale. And I remember I pulled that book out and I looked at it, I go, oh, this is one of those positive thinking books I've heard about. I never read one, but I heard about it. And I started reading this book. And I'm reading this thing going, holy cow, I'm reading about all these people who accomplished all these great things. And I'm thinking, you know, I got a mind just like these people have. Why can't I accomplish something? Well, understand, I come from a very middle-class family. My father is military. My mother was a nurse. So you get these certain beliefs about what the world is. But I'm reading this book, and I'm thinking, wow, it's a lot more than that if you just use your brain. So I remember I set a goal. And this company had about 14 health clubs, and they had over 100 salespeople. And I was brand new in sales, so I said, I'm going to set a goal. I'm going to be the top salesperson in this whole company, because the book talked about set goals. And so I did. Well, about 3 months later, I was a top salesperson in the whole company. And I remember saying, how did that happen? Read the book. It said set a goal, set the goal, and then all of a sudden it happened. How did that happen? And then I realized that once I read it, I started learning more about selling and talk to people who were real successful and say, well, what are some of the things you do, and how do you do it, and how do you explain this and explain that? So that was what it was. And man, I'll tell you something. I was on cloud 9. The reason why I was on cloud 9 was when I grew up, I always thought that you worked to make a living, okay? I never thought you could actually love what you were doing at the same time you're working and actually make money doing it all at the same time. I mean, that was so far from my thinking. But I'm thinking, holy cow, I'm making money doing something that I absolutely love doing. Well, things were great until about August. And in August, John Carpenter, the vice president from Louisiana or from Utah, came in again. I remember it was a Friday afternoon, and he said, I need to talk to you. And I said, okay. So I go in, and he starts telling me about how their health club in Merritt Island wasn't doing very well. And he wanted me to move to Merritt Island. And it was like, I mean, in my brain, I'm thinking, are you kidding me? Like, I love it here. I mean, I love it in Gainesville. I don't want to go to Merritt Island. I remember looking, I said, Mr. Carpenter, I said, look, I'm only 20 years old. I can't really help. And I remember exactly what he said to me. He goes, Joe, it's not chronological age that matters. He goes, you can help. So on Sunday, I packed everything into my Volkswagen, backseat actually, and drove down to Cocoa Beach, moved into the Holiday Inn, and the next morning I show up at the health club. So the regional manager was there, a guy named Pete Minderspahn. All the employees are sitting there. And he starts to introduce me. And he goes, I want to introduce Joe Cirulli. He's the top salesperson in the entire company. I don't have a clue what he said after that because I went blank. All I was thinking was, don't tell him that. Now they're going to expect me to do something, and I don't even want to be here. And so then he left. So my life consisted of working all day, working out at night, going back to the Holiday Inn, getting up in the morning, coming back to work, working all day, working out at night, going back to the Holiday Inn. This was day after day after day. I hated it. I hated it. And I can remember one day driving to work up the causeway, and I remember I was in tears driving to work. And I'm thinking, I hate it here. What am I doing here? I said, what am I doing having a problem, like a crisis with my career? I'm only 20 years old. You know, you're supposed to be in college having fun like everybody else. And I remember I thought, well, I'm gonna just quit. And then I thought, what am I going to do after I quit? I mean, I have a great family. I said, but I wasn't ready to move back home and live with my mother and father. So I remember the book I read. I thought, well, maybe there's another book. So I went to the bookstore, and I see this book, The Amazing Results of Positive Thinking. I actually first thought, oh, it must have been people like me who read the book. They wrote a book about them. Well, it wasn't, but I remember sitting at work, and I'm going through this book, and I'm reading about people who went through the most miserable times and how they worked their way through it. And I'm going through this, I'm thinking, man, I don't have a problem. I said, this guy, he had a problem. And finally, when I finished, I said, I know what my problem is. I got an attitude problem. I'm just thinking about this the wrong way. So I decided I'm just going to change the way I think. I'm going to convince myself that I like it here. Man, everything improved at that moment. I started walking faster. I started thinking differently. And everything went great for the next few months. And my birthday's in December, and it was coming up. And see, I always had this dream car as a kid. It's because of my best friend, who was exactly 3 years older than me, on my birthday, his birthday too. He had this maroon MGB. He had a white one, but my dream was maroon. He used to let me drive his MGB, and I thought, someday I'm going to get a MGB. So it's coming up, and I thought, I'm going to get one for my birthday. So I took all the money I had in my savings account. I used it as a down payment on the car, knowing that the next month I was going to get a big commission check so I could replace my savings. And so I bought the car, drove back home for Christmas, and came back to Merritt Island right after Christmas. Now, this health club was located in a mall. It was in the Merritt Square Mall. And I remember Monday morning going to the door. There's a sign on the door saying that the health club had been closed down by the Department of Revenue for not paying taxes. I mean, nothing. And that was it. There was nobody to even say, like, what happened? Nothing, because there was nobody. Well, right after that, I got a call from the bank who had cashed my previous paycheck to tell me that my paycheck bounced and they wanted the money back from my paycheck. Of which then I had to go to my landlord to get my $95 deposit back because I had $10. And I went to the bank and I told them that I don't have the money to pay you back my paycheck. I said, but anyway, they were nice enough to take my paycheck and make it my very last car payment. All right? I gave them the $105 because my car payment was $105.25. And I paid it. So now I just got in the car and I drove back to Gainesville. Well, the health club was open for like 3 more days in Gainesville. And while I was in there, all the power went off, lights went off, and that was it. It shut down. But I stayed positive. I had the key to the front door. So I lived inside that closed down building for about the next month. I remember a friend of mine gave me some money so I could buy some food. But, it was pitch black, in there at night. But that's just the way it was. But after about a month, I heard about a health club down in St. Petersburg that was looking for an assistant manager. So I got in my MGB, had all my clothes in the trunk now. Anyway, there was no back seat in MGB. So I drove down to St. Petersburg, and I got the job working in a European health spa Well, I had no money, so I told the manager, I said, I have to live here. So I lived inside the club, and I remember I kept a blanket and my alarm clock underneath the couch in the lobby. Thank God health clubs weren't open 24 hours a day back then, because I just worked all day and worked out at night and went to bed, and I got up before all the members came in, and that's how it was, day in and day out. And I was down there for about 3 months. When I got, I was starting to get a few things in order again, when I got a phone call from a guy from Louisiana, a guy named John Swallow. And he goes, listen, I heard your name, I heard where you're at. He goes, I was wondering if you'd be interested in coming back to Gainesville. Well, all I ever wanted to do was get back to Gainesville. So I said, well, when can we meet? I said, I got to give them 2 weeks notice before I leave, and I did. But I said, I'll be back. So at the end of 2 weeks, I resigned, came back to Gainesville, and I'm sitting with John. It's 1 o'clock in the morning, and I'm sitting with him. I remember I'm 21 years old now, and I'm talking to him, and I'm saying, I can do this, and I can work on this, and these are some of the projects I'll be working on. I was so enthusiastic, I'll never forget it, because he's sitting there in the chair, and right in the middle of my enthusiastic talk, he just goes, he fell asleep. But when he woke back up, he goes, but I got to tell you, Joe, he goes, I don't have all the money yet. He goes, I should be getting it soon. I'll get a hold of you. It was like, what? Like I'm all ready to go back to work. Well, now I have no place to live. So now I live in my car. All right, so I lived in my MGB, which actually, if you have to live in a car, the MGB is pretty comfortable because the seats recline, all the way back. So I lived in my MGB, and I actually stayed in the parking lot of the closed-down health club. But like I said, once again, that's the way it was. I never was angry, upset. Not at anybody else in any real bad way, except for inspiration. So anyway, one day I went to the McDonald's. The McDonald's down on 13th Street? Where are we? 13th Street and University, there's a McDonald's right behind the Holiday Inn, right next to the Holiday Inn. Well, that's where I went in, and I ordered a Diet Coke, small Diet Coke, and the girl said it was 16 cents. And I reached into my pocket. Now, the reason why I have 12 cents in my pocket is because a member brought me 12 cents the other day. He said, see if you can do it again. So anyway, all I had was 12 cents. And obviously I couldn't pay for the Diet Coke. And so somewhat embarrassed, I kind of walked out the front door. Now, if you ever go to that McDonald's, there's a canopy. There wasn't a canopy back then. Because I remember I stood there. I remember I looked up at the sky. I remember I thanked God for everything that happened to me. I said the reason why is that I went through every person's name that was involved in all these things that caused all these things to happen. I wasn't angry at them. I just said, I want to thank you because I promise you I will never go through this again. I will never be broke again. I will save money from the minute I start making any money. Well, while I was standing there talking to God, this friend of mine comes walking up, and he starts, I didn't tell anybody what I was going to. Remember, I have a great family. I could have called home, but what would happen if you called home? Come home. That's all you go to know. So I never called home. But he came up, and he started talking to me about something. Finally, he says, where are you living? I said, right there. And I pointed to my car. And he said, he goes, my wife and I, we have an extra room. He goes, why don't you just come over, stay at our house till the health club opens up? Which I did, which was great of him. So in about, 40 days or so, 45 days, I got a call that he was ready to open the club again. So I said, I'm 21 years old now, and I'm managing my first health club. And first thing I thought, maybe I better go find another book. So I go to the bookstore, and I look on the shelf, and I see this book. It's got a really interesting title. It said, Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. So, I remember I looked at, first thing I was intrigued by, it was written in like 1937. I think, wow, it's this old a book. It's still on the shelves. So I get and I start reading it. It says, this book has been responsible for more people becoming millionaires than any book ever written. Not that I ever thought about becoming a millionaire, but it just intrigued me that it would say that. So I started reading the book. Be going through it and be talking about all these different things and say, it kept saying, in order to be successful, you must know the secret. In order to be successful, you must know the secret. I read that so many times. Finally, I'm saying, just tell me the damn secret. I'm going through it. And when I was done, I knew what it was. It was real simple. This is how simple it was. You just had to know what you wanted out of your life. That was that simple. So at this moment in time, I'm totally inspired, right? So I took a legal pad. I said, okay, well, if it's that simple, I'll start writing all these things down. I said, just imagine what you want in your life. So number one, I will own my own health club in Gainesville, Florida, so nobody can tell me where I'm going to live. That was number one. Number two, I'll make the health club respected in the Gainesville community because they were going bankrupt left and right. Third thing, I'm going to put some fun things down like, okay, I'll own a home in the mountains, I'll own a home in the ocean, I'll build my parents a home. Put down that by the time I'm 25 years old, I will make $100,000. Then I put, okay, let's see. I'll own a little Mercedes like the kind the $6 million man used to drive, right? There's put down that, okay, I'll become a pilot, own my own airplane, I'll become a black belt, I'll travel all over America, I'll travel all over the world. I remember the last thing I wrote down, I'll save $1 million. But the other thing I knew you were supposed to do was you're supposed to read the list. So every night before I went to bed, I read the list, and every morning before I went to work, I read the list. And later I'd hear a psychologist say, he said, you can't move away from what you're thinking. You're always moving in the direction of your dominant thought. I thought, well, that's cool. Put your dominant thoughts. Keep reading them over and over and over. Put them in your brain. And so the other thing was that you read it before you go to bed and you read it before you go to work. Why? Because that's the point in time where your brain's a little clearer. Once a day gets going, you got so much other stuff in there. But if you do it before you go to bed, you do it before you go to work, you're a little clearer. So I did it day in and day out. And everything went great for about a year. When the owner's mother got sick, he was living in Louisiana, he asked me if I would be interested, or if I would run the health club in Merritt Island and the health club in Gainesville. Well, I was 22 at the time. I didn't really know how you ran two clubs that were 3 hours apart, so I did the best way I knew. I'd work all day long at 9 o'clock at night, drive there for 3 hours, get up, work all day long, 9 o'clock at night, drive back. I did this for 3 months. When I realized that in the process of trying to keep people healthy, I was going to kill myself. And there was a couple. Remember, I'm 22. They were about 40. And remember, their names were Ron and Kathy Lepper, of which they were appropriately named. And the owner started talking to them about, running the club, one of the clubs. And, being 22, I wasn't quite as naive as I was when I was 19, and I knew they were con artists. I mean, I just could tell they were con artists. But the scary thing was the owner connected with them so well. That's what scared me more, because I always believed in the birds of a feather flock together. I think, God, he sure connects with them really well. Well, they started messing up things really bad. Then they were trying to ask me to come back to put things back together and to say things to members like this. I said, there's no way I can say that. I would never talk to the members like that. So I realized they were going to go bankrupt, which they did about 30 days later. But across town, there was a little health club. It was almost on the corner of Archer Road and 34th Street. I know there's a Shell gas station there, but there's an engineering firm right next to it. But that used to be a bank. It was called the Guaranteed Federal Bank. And above that bank was a health club. Now, the health club was 1,500 square feet. I mean, to give you an idea how small that is, if you take this whole room, it's 5,500 square feet. So it was 15, and that included everything. All right? So anyway, I thought, well, let me call over there. So I called over there, and one of the employees said, are you just checking to see if you're looking for a manager? And they go, no, we're doing well. We don't need a manager and all. So I said, okay. Well, the next day, the owner of the club called me up. And he said, can I talk to you? And I said, sure. So we're sitting down and talking. And he's asking me to come to work to run his health club. Now, the only irony to it was he was the same guy who told me when I was 19 sales were for special people. It's the same guy. So anyway, I said, let me see your financials. Well, I looked at his financials, and I'm 23 now, so I'm getting a little smarter over the years. And I looked at his financials, and I realized, whoa, he's on the verge of bankruptcy. I mean, he owed so much money, and the revenues were so low. I remember for one split second, I thought, I don't want to get involved in this kind of stuff again, because just so you know, I had already worked for 5 companies that had gone bankrupt, okay? And so anyway, I remember I looked at it, and I thought, no, maybe I'll just take everything I've learned and apply it and see if I can change this. And that was the challenge that I decided to take. And 4 months later, I had paid off all its debts, and it was actually making money. But he had a partner, and I remember they were supposed to get a loan. I mean, it was such a small club. It was a $25,000 loan. And I was supposed to get that $25,000 to fix the club up. Well, I kept waiting for it and waiting for it and waiting for it. And finally, I said to him, where is the money? This has been going on so long. And he looks at me, he goes, look, he goes, my partner talked with her accountant. And her accountant told her, he goes, look, all health clubs go bankrupt. So what's the sense of putting that money into it? So they took the $25,000 loan, they split it, and then they just gave me the bill to pay back out of the health club. And I remember when he told me that, I said, let me tell you how it is. Either she goes or I go. I said, I'm not going to sit around and watch you guys bankrupt this while I'm trying to make it work. He said, look, he goes, she wants some money. I remember she wanted $5,000 down in payments. And he goes, I don't have the $5,000. I'll tell you how much I believed in it. I went to the bank. I got a loan on my signature for $5,000. I came back. I gave him the money. I said, see, get her out. And I didn't own it, nothing. That's how bad I wanted it to work. So I started paying back my loan, started making payments, to her. Everything was okay for about 8 more months when one day he came to me. And he goes, look, Joe, I'm having a few problems. And I said, what's going on? He goes, well, he said, first of all, I'm an alcoholic. And I said, okay. He goes, the second, he goes, I'm going through a divorce. And I said, okay. He goes, and the third is I'm going bankrupt and the health club is going with me. So I'm going to tell you something. I didn't even panic. Remember, this is health club number 6. And I didn't even panic. Remember, I was still reading my list. I was reading. This is now years later. I read my list every night, every morning. And I thought, maybe this is my chance. Maybe this is when I start. Maybe this is when I do the first thing on my list. So I said, look, if there was a way that I could pay off your debts, I said, would you just leave me alone and let me take this over and I'll change it into a new company? And he goes, yeah, I got nothing to lose. He was losing it anyway. So that was good. But then the next day I got a letter from the bank. And the bank was a letter from the president of the bank because the bank was the landlord for the health club. And the letter was that the health club was being evicted in 30 days. So I remember I went to the president of the bank. I said, look, just give me an additional 30 days. I don't know why I thought 60 days I could do it, but it's like just an additional 30 days. So he agreed to give me the additional 30 days. So now I've got to go out to the banks. Now, here's the problem with going out to a bank. I'm 24 now. When you're 24 and the only collateral you have is a 3-year-old MGB, and every health club in town, every bank in town had been burnt by health clubs, all going bankrupt, and here I am trying to get money to start a health club. Well, obviously, one turned down after the next, after the next, after the next, and now it's the end of the 60 days. So I've got to go back to the president of the bank and beg him to give me 30 more days. I told him there was, back then, there were not many spaces that were available for rent at all. But, Butler Plaza, which is huge as it is now, was one strip, all right, just one strip. And there was a space in there, and it was 1,800 square feet. It had been vacant for a year. So I had called over to Butler Plaza, and I told him I was interested in the space, and I met with him, and I said, look, I'm going to be working on getting the money, but I'll stay in touch with you on a regular basis, and I was. Now, there was even a member of the health club. He was an architect. His name is Gene Davis. And Gene and I enrolled Gene, and we had become good friends. And one day I pulled him in my office. I said, Gene, I'm going to tell you what's going on right now that nobody knows about. I said, if people knew what I'm going through right now, it's going to scare the hell out of them all. I said, so I'm going to ask you not to talk to anybody about this, but I'm going to need your help. I said, when I get that space, I'm going to have to get into it right away. I said, I'm asking you to draw it out for me. I said, and the thing is, I can't pay you. I don't have money to pay you. I said, but I promise you I will pay you someday, if you'll do it. And he did. So I had the drawings. Now, I have to go back to the bank. I have to beg them to give me 30 additional days, of which they finally agreed to give me the 30 additional days. And now I'm still out searching for money. It's the last day of this additional 30 days. And it was a Wednesday, and I had gotten one bank to give me $6,700. Now, the reason why they gave me $6,700 was it was the same bank I had gotten the $5,000 loan from, and I still owed them $3,300, and they told me they'd give me a loan on my signature for $10,000 minus what I owed. So I got a check for $6,700. It was 5 o'clock. I was just praying to God that the president of the bank forgot it was the last day. But he didn't. At 5 o'clock, he called me, and he goes, I'm shutting you down today. He goes, I want the key back tomorrow. And I said, Mr. Mizell, I got the money. I just didn't tell him how much. I said, I got the location. I just need a little more time. And he goes, there is no more time. And I said, look, I'll meet you tomorrow morning at 11 o'clock. He said, okay. So the next morning, I get to work. And we know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go sign a lease with Butler Plaza so I could go to the president of the bank to show him that I have a lease. And that just give me a little more time and I'll make the move. So at 9 o'clock, I called the person at Butler Plaza. And remember, I've been talking to him all the way through this, and of which he then informed me, he goes, oh, Joe, I've been meaning to call you. And I said, about what? He goes, I just leased that space out. I said, you what? He goes, I remember exactly what he said. He goes, we leased it out to a national company. We thought that would be better than the local company. And I said, that's it? He goes, that's it. He hung up the phone. I remember I'm sitting in my office. I remember I've been going for 90 days straight to try and make this happen and not being able to talk to anybody about what I was going through. I remember I literally put my head down on the desk and I said, I'm beaten. You know, I've been beaten. After about 45 minutes, I just got up and I remember I walked down the stairwell, got in my car, and I drove across town to go visit a friend of mine who was an attorney. Not because he was an attorney, but because he was a friend of mine. I remember he's sitting across the desk. I'm sitting in the chair here, and I'm in tears telling about everything that happened. Like I needed a hug or something. He didn't give me one. I remember he said, look, you have no choice. He goes, you've got to go find another place. I said, yeah, I know, except I have to give the president of the bank wants the key back. He wants to shut it down today. So anyway, I got up. I remember, got in my car, drove over to the bank president, to their office, their headquarters. And walked into the president of the bank's office, and it was funny because at that moment in time, I don't know if you ever, most of you have probably been in sports in your whole life. I remember when I used to wrestle. Like, I'd be terrified before I'd wrestle until the moment, and then I wasn't terrified anymore. I remember when I walked in that office, I was mad. He goes, I want the key back. I said, I'm not giving you the key back. He goes, what do you mean you're not giving me the key back? I said, I'm not giving you the key back. I said, look, my dream was to have my own health club in Gainesville. I said, every health club I worked for went bankrupt. I said, if you shut this down, it's going to make me look like the bad guy. I said, but I promise you, I won't say his name, but I said, I promise you, I said, before I leave this town, I'm going to the newspaper, I'm going to the television, I'm going to the radio stations. I said, you may kill my dream of having my own health club, but I promise you, I will kill the reputation of your bank before I leave this town. Now, I didn't actually know how I was going to do that, but I think at the moment I sounded pretty convincing. And he said to me, he goes, well, do you have a lease? I said, I just lost it. And he goes, okay, here's the deal. It was a Thursday. He goes, here's the deal. If by Monday morning you have a copy of a lease and a rent check for $1,200, I'll try to get you 3 more weeks. So I said, okay. So I left. So the first place I go is the Creekside Mall, right down the street here, because it was a new shopping center at that point. And I see this guy walking around. He looked like Woody Allen. And I said, excuse me, do you work here? He goes, yeah, I'm the general manager. And I said, I'm looking at moving my health club. I was wondering if you have any locations. And I remember he showed me these different places. None of them would work. I literally went back. I had one leg in my car. And he goes, well, there is one other space. I said, okay. And I'm walking through it. And I'm saying, this is it. This is it. I mean, I absolutely knew. I didn't say anything to him, but inside, I absolutely knew it was a place. But now it's Friday. He said, I'll call you to let you know if the owner would let a health club come in here, something about reputations. And he said, I don't know if he's going to let a health club come in here. Well, it's Friday, and it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and I still haven't heard from him. Remember, I have to have a lease Monday morning on the President's Bank. At 4 o'clock, I called him up. I said, Mr. Corwin, this is Joe Cirulli from the Gainesville Health Fitness Center. I said, I just want you to know, of all the places I looked at, I liked yours the most. That was the truth and the lie. There was no other place to look at. And I said, I was wondering if you had a chance to talk to the owner. And he said, I'll call you back. Now, if you want to know the longest hour of your life, sit in front of a phone, waiting for it to ring, knowing your whole future is dependent upon that one call. At 5 o'clock, he calls me back, and he says, I spoke to the owner, and he was against it. He said, but then he spoke to his attorney, the attorney thought maybe it was a good idea. Now, later I learned he thought I would be able to go in there, put all the electrical, put everything in there, then go bankrupt, and they wouldn't have to spend the money, but it didn't matter. He thought it was a good idea. So anyway, remember, it's 5 o'clock. And he said, when would you like to sign a lease? I said, where are you? And he told me. So I drive over to their office, and remember, I'm 24 years old. I sit down. I really have no money at all. Sit down. I have $6,700. What am I talking about? I sign a lease obligating me to $168,000 at that moment. And they wanted $3,800, so I gave them $3,800. Monday morning, I met with the president of the bank. I gave him a rent check for $1,200 and a copy of the lease. Now I had $1,700 to start the company. So I got a piece of paper, and I just sketched out what it was going to look like. There's a buddy of mine who was a carpenter. We went and bought $1,700 worth of lumber and hammers and nails, and I didn't know how to build anything. I had to say, what do I do with this? He goes, go here, do this, do this, do this, do this. So I started literally laying it out, with wood, what the health club was going to look like. But I knew I needed this thing called a permit. I never built anything, but I knew they said something like, you need a permit. So anyway, so I looked in the yellow pages, and I knew I needed a plumber. So I see Hughley Plumbing, and I see General Contractor. So I call up Mr. Hughley. I said, Mr. Hughley, this is Joe Cirulli from the Gainesville Health Fitness Center. You know, I'm building a new club in Creekside Mall. I'm interested in you doing the plumbing work, and I was wondering if you could come by. He goes, oh, sure. So he comes by Friday afternoon. And so I am saying, okay, look, there's going to be a whirlpool here, there's a steam room here, there's a sauna here, there's 2 bathrooms over there, and there's 5 showers over there, and the sinks are over there. This I explained to him. And I said, when can you start? And he goes, I can start Monday morning while this concrete is out of here. And it was all concrete. And I said, okay, no problem. It'll all be out by Monday morning. And he goes, have you got a permit? I go, no, I was wondering if you could, I understand you're a general contractor. I was wondering if you could get me a permit. He goes, well, have you got drawings? I go, oh, yeah. And I reached in my pocket. I swear to God. I hand it to him. He looks at it. He bursts out laughing. He goes, let me work on it. So he left, and we got a sledgehammer. And my buddy and I started on Friday night. We worked straight through until Monday. We'd go grab a sandwich, pass out for an hour on the concrete, get back up, keep knocking it out. Because if you ever knock out concrete, you'll find out. Once you smash the concrete, there's steel mesh. That's all in there. You've got to cut it all out, then knock it out, then cut it out and knock it out. But Monday morning, I remember 7 o'clock, I took the last swing with that sledgehammer, and the sledgehammer broke in 2. And I remember thinking, oh, my God, what a great omen. If it broke in the middle of the night, I would never been able to finish. So I knew that was like the first good sign. So we started building it. So now I'm hiring electricians, carpenters, air conditioning people. I'm hiring everybody. I don't have a penny to pay anybody. And but I knew that if you bought advertising, you didn't have to pay for 30 days. So I started advertising like crazy about this new health club, coming to Creekside Mall. So people would come and join, and knowing they were going to start in 3 weeks, or they could go to the other location, if they wanted to. And fortunately, every week, people would come and join, and I'd be able to. So you'd be the electrician. I'd say, you'd give me your bill for $3,000. I'd say, here's $1,500. Come back next week. I'll have the other $1,500. And that's how I did it with everybody. Now, it was about 3 weeks into it, and remember, I had to move them from that place to that place. I remember I put down on the exercise floor red shag carpeting, and that was in at that time, and didn't even have the walls up. Didn't have bathrooms, didn't have showers. But I put it down, and I moved the equipment into that space because I knew I needed to get people working out. And I'll never forget it because the building inspector, his name was Pat Young, he comes walking in the club. And I remember all these guys are working, and all this equipment's in here. And he walks in, he goes, who put this equipment in here? He goes, who said this equipment? Who owns this place? And they point to me, all right? And like I'm over here, and I remember he comes walking up to me. He goes, let me tell you something, boy. He says, if I see one person in here working out before I give you a certificate of occupancy, he goes, I'll shut you down in a minute. And he left. An hour later, I had everybody in there working out because I had no choice, right? I had to keep people buying memberships in order to build the place. And it was funny because like I said, I had all these contractors in there working, and none of them knew I didn't really have any money. But the great thing was, being Italian and being from New York, there was this rumor that I heard that I was in the mafia. And I remember thinking, oh, thank God they believe that, because they'll think I have the money to be able to pay them. But somehow, every single week, I had the money to keep paying them. And I kept, for a 6-month period of time, I had people in there working out, terrified that the inspector was going to come in. He never did. But I'm going to just tell you something. I didn't have bathrooms for like 3 months. I didn't have showers for 3 months. Somebody would come up to me and say, Joe, where's the bathroom? I go, well, if you just go out the door and take a right, go take a left, go around, you'll see a restaurant. It's called Pepe's. If you open the door, it's on the left-hand side. I swear to God, I had no... One day, I walked out of my office. Now, back then, when I first opened, it was Women's Days and Men's Days. Women's Days were Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Men's Days were Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. That was normal, okay? I walked out of my office. There were 45 women screaming at me. And I'm standing, they're all screaming at me, and the only thing that was going through my mind was, oh, they only knew. Because nobody knew, right? So I thought, look, whatever period of time it takes me to get this finished, I'll just extend your membership that period of time. Does that work with you? And they said yes. So that's what I did. Well, now it's coming up, Christmas of that year, which was 1978. And anyway, shut the health club down for the week between Christmas and New Year's. Had the building inspectors come in, and when we opened in January, we were actually legal at that point. And at that point, now it was just, how do I get bigger? So it was every time a store went out of business, I would take over the store. I would just keep expanding the health club. I mean, there was one store, they weren't ready to move, and I built a walkway right around them. I called it Gainesville's most expensive walkway, because I had to build this brick walkway all the way to get to the other side. Eventually, they couldn't stand group exercise on one side, and aerobics actually on one side, and the health club working out on the other side. Eventually, they moved. So I expanded the health club from 2,500 square feet to 11,000 square feet. And I was actually in the middle of doing a pretty big expansion. I was actually going to add 2 parts of the mall together to do an expansion of the club. And I mean, at this point, I probably spent $100,000 doing everything I had to do when I got a letter from the city telling me that the health club, that I couldn't expand because we were 3 parking spaces short. And there was no way to find 3 more parking spaces. So it completely brought everything to a stop. Now, the good thing was, because of that, I didn't sign my new 5-year lease that would have obligated me, for the next 5 years. And it was actually a blessing. I mean, it wasn't a curse. Because it was funny, because during that time, a health club company was moving into Florida. They opened up one club. They're from Wisconsin. They opened up a club down in Clearwater. And they wanted to meet with me. So I said, okay, fine. So they come in, and it's really funny because I'm sitting at a desk with them, how they start to inform me how they're coming to Gainesville and they're going to put me out of business. And I'm sitting there thinking, well, what a stupid thing to say to somebody. I said, well, just thank you very much. Well, when they left, I said, let me go see their club. Well, their club was very nice, and it was better than what I would have even when I got done with everything. And so I was trying to figure out, okay, what do I do? It was 11 o'clock once on this one Saturday night, and I was at a restaurant with some friends. And one of the guys said, he goes, hey, I see the Winn-Dixie went out of business. And I said, which Winn-Dixie? They said, the Winn-Dixie right across the street from the health club, which was in Westgate Regency. I said, you're kidding me. Well, I'm going to tell you. For 4 years, every time I drove past that Winn-Dixie, I'd say, what a great place for a health club. I said that, I swear to God, for 4 years. And now they're telling me, and I'm still reading books on how you're supposed to think, and I'm thinking, holy cow, I actually willed them out of business. And so anyway, on Monday morning, I called the people from Winn-Dixie, and they're lawyers, of which they then told me there's no way a health club is going in there. We've had health clubs in some of our stores. They all go bankrupt. There's no way. So I said, okay, let me find who owns this place. So I found out these 2 old men owned it, Fred Cohn and Ben Franklin. Not the original, but close. And so I went over to see Mr. Cohn. And he, even though he was 78 years old, he still went to work every day from like 8 to 12. And it was right behind the shopping center, this little door that would say FC on it. So I went in there, and I said, Mr. Cohn, I'm really interested in leasing your space. And he goes, I'm not. He goes, I've been on the board of many banks. They've all been burned by health clubs. There's no way a health club is going to go in there. I said, okay. So I left. And then I came back the next day. I said, Mr. Cohn, I really am interested in renting your space. He goes, remember I told you I'm not interested. I said, I understand. I'll see you later. I left. I came back the next day. Mr. Cohn, I'm really interested in renting your space. I went in to see him every single day. But after about 3 weeks, I was in the health club at Creekside, and one of my employees said, "You see that guy going out the door right there?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "Well, he's with Norman's Country." I remember who'd been here for a long time. There was a grocery store called Norman's Country. He said, "Norman's Country is signing the lease over at that space tomorrow." And I said, "Whoa." So I go to the door. I said, "Excuse me, I understand you guys are signing the lease over for the Westgate?" He goes, "Yeah." He goes, "If you don't cause a problem with it." And I'm thinking, I think you're the problem. So I remember I left and I went home. It was a Sunday. I remember I was depressed. I mean, I really was depressed for about 3 hours. And then I realized I'm never going to get anywhere being depressed. So I sat up all night long and I wrote out a list. This side, all the reasons why you do not want Norman's Country in there. And on this side, these are all the reasons why you want Gainesville Health Fitness in there. I went in there 9 o'clock that Monday morning. I said, "Mr. Cohn, I've written out some things about why you don't want those guys and why you do want us." He said, "Fine." I said, "Do you mind if I read it?" He goes, "No." I sat there for 1 hour, and I went through everything with him. And when I was done, he goes, "Sounds good, thanks." It's okay, and I left. Now, fortunately, they were real slow, on moving. But I'm going back. I'm going back to see Mr. Cohn every single day. Now, the great thing was, he had a secretary. Her name was Bee. When Mr. Cohn wasn't there, I'd sit down and talk to Bee. Well, Bee and I became best of friends, so she'd always tell me what was on his mind. So the next day, he thinks that all health clubs go bankrupt. So the next day, I say, "I just want you to know, I brought over my financials, so you could see my financials." Then she'd tell me, he thinks fitness is a fad, so I'd bring him like hundreds of articles on fitness and stick it in his office. I said, "It's just so you know, it's not a fad." But there was another good thing that happened too. In all the years that I've been in the business, for all the health clubs that I worked for that went bankrupt, whenever I went to work for another health club, I was always able to convince the owner to take in the members of the previous club and just honor their agreements as it was. I said, because otherwise you're going to make enemies out of these people. We don't need to do that. So I would honor everybody's membership through all the years. So now, it's my own company. So all these people who've been with me through all those bankrupt clubs now are members of my club, and they had been with me for, at this point, like 13 years. So I never asked anybody for anything, but I would just go to them. I said, "Do you know Mr. Cohn?" "Oh, yeah, I've known him my whole life." I said, "I'm trying to get the space, but he doesn't think a health club is the right thing. It would be, if there's a downfall, if there's a depression, people will stop going to the health club, but they'll still need to get food. They'll still need to eat." I understand. They still want to work out, though. But anyway, I said, if you get a chance, would you let him know that we are a good company and we'd be a good fit for his? "Oh, yeah." So like one at a time, these people would go talk to Mr. Cohn, and because they all knew him, and there were like dozens of them. I remember one day I went out on the exercise floor, and there were two members of my club, great guys. They were both 75 years old. They were twins, Emmett and Gus McGriff. And I said to Emmett, "Emmett, you know Mr. Cohn?" He goes, "Oh, I've known him my whole life." I said, "I'm trying to take over the space, but he doesn't think the health club is the right thing. If you ever see him, would you let him know that we are a good business?" No, this is no joke. He turns around, yells out to 9 other old men who'd been with me forever. They all huddled up, they all walked out the door, and they all went to see Mr. Cohn together. Because the next day, I went to see Mr. Cohn. I remember he looks up at me, he goes, "You sure got a lot of friends." And I said, "Well, they're actually all yours." And I got to tell you, Mr. Cohn reminded me of my grandfather, so I couldn't help but love the guy. He was just a great guy. I mean, he'd chew tobacco and spit in the basket all the time. I'd sit there while he was like, nothing bothered me about him. But anyway, he's still not moving. But I went to another friend of mine, a girl who was a interior designer, an architectural student, said, let's draw out what the front of that building will look like, when I'm done redoing the whole thing. So she drew it all up. It was 4 feet long, about 3 feet high. The next day I walked into his office, and I had Velcro, and I stuck it on his wall, and his desk was right there, so he would have to see it, all the time. And I said, "I know it's not going to work. It can't be Gainesville Health and Fitness, the beef people." I said, we got to make it look. We got to make it look, something much, much better. So he had that done. But he's still not moving. But I'm still trying to learn what his concerns are. And this one friend of mine comes and he tells me, he goes, "Hey, Joe, last night I was driving down the street and I saw Mr. Cohn driving, and I saw him turn into a bar." He goes, "So I turned in the bar." He went up to the bar and ordered beer. I sat right next to him. I ordered beer. Brought the beer up. I go, I should probably be at the Gainesville Health Fitness Center instead of drinking this beer. He goes, do you know that Joe guy? He goes, well, I know who he is. And he goes, well, he wants my place, but what he doesn't know, and he'd tell him this stuff. So the next day I'd go see Mr. Cohn and talk. He never knew how I knew. I mean, I always knew what he was saying. One day I remember he went to introduce me to one of his friends at a restaurant. So he introduces me, and the guy puts his hand, I go to shake his hand. He goes, don't shake his hand. He goes, he'll know everything about you by tomorrow. So anyway, I still don't have the space, though. So I decided to resort to bribery. And I knew that he had bad circulation in his legs. I went out and I bought him a $2,000 recumbent bicycle from Nautilus, and I had it delivered to his house, to his office. I went down to Micanopy, or Melrose, one of those two places, and I bought him a spittoon. It took me 6 hours to shine that spittoon, and I had it delivered to him. I found out what kind of whiskey he drank. I had it delivered to him. Now, this was something else I learned about Mr. Cohn, because this is now almost 5 months, okay, that I've been going through this with him. On his wall, he had a calendar, and every month it would be a new girl in a bikini. So I knew he liked pretty girls. So every day I'd go to the prettiest girl. I'd say, could you do me a favor? Could you deliver this gift over to Mr. Cohn? So they'd take the gift, and they'd walk into Mr. Cohn's office and say, Joe, why don't you just wish you good morning? And they'd bring him the gift. And this one girl who actually was in the movies, eventually, I said, what did he say when you walked in? She goes, well, he was on the phone. He goes, hold on. An angel just walked into my office. After doing this for like a week, I started getting phone calls from people telling me what he liked, so I could figure out what to buy him next. And then eventually his friends would just say, just give him the damn place. Just give him the place. And so I go into his office one day, and he's talking to a pharmacy who's interested in leasing the space. And I'm just standing right in front of him. And he goes, I don't know. He goes, I'm really leaning towards my Italian stallion standing right here in front of me. And he goes, thanks. And he hung up the phone out. Understand that for 5 months, that was the first indication that he gave me, the only indication that he gave me. He says, okay, look it. He goes, you just have one more obstacle to go through. He goes, you need to talk with my partner. Now, his partner was Ben Franklin. And all I ever heard about Ben Franklin was he is a mean son of a bee, but they didn't just end with a bee. And I thought, oh, heck, I've been with tough people. I said, okay, no problem. So anyway, I go into this office, and I remember Mr. Cohn is sitting here behind his desk, and I'm sitting here, and Ben Franklin is sitting here. And he starts asking me questions. He goes, do you drink? And Fred would go, oh, I checked up on this boy. He drinks maybe 1 beer a month. And then he goes, are you married? I said, no, sir. He goes, don't you believe in marriage? I go, no, I believe in marriage. Sorry, I just haven't met the person I want to marry. And he starts asking me all these. I realized these questions are going to go on forever. So I took my chair, and I moved it this close to him. And I sat here because I was about 9.5 feet inside his 10-foot comfort zone. And I mean, he's going like, he couldn't get started. He goes, how much rent will you pay? I said, I'll pay you the same amount of rent I told you I'd pay when I first started. And they figured it out, and they said, okay, it's yours. So this was 6 months from the day, that I met him. I got the space and started building it, and I remember I was getting ready to open, and Mr. Cohn, Mr. Cohn would come in with all of his old friends and saying, well, my whirlpool is going to be over here, and my swimming pool is going to be over here, which was great. I mean, unfortunately, he died the week that we opened. But, I mean, I had gone from never knowing this guy to, I love the guy. And anyway, I continued to keep building the club. And there weren't a lot of health clubs back then, obviously, because they all went out of business. And, most of my membership were students. And I realized that most of the people who lived in the town really didn't join the health club because all they knew about health clubs was they went bankrupt, but the students had no clue. So, my whole membership was students. I must have been 99% students. When one day I opened up the newspaper, in 1987, I remember reading, University of Florida to open fitness center to rival commercial facility in town. And one of the things that you learn in business is you always have to say, what is the worst possible thing that could happen? Well, it was really easy. Nobody would ever join my health club again. That was the real easy part to figure out. So I started looking and thinking, I've read about companies that, 100 years ago they made tires and now they're a pharmaceutical company. I said, maybe I have to become something else. So then I started thinking, well, maybe I could become a massive rehab facility if I have to become something else? So that's when I started putting ideas together for a small rehab facility to start testing it out to see if we can make it work, which eventually led to the rehab centers, that we have now. But started building that up. At the same time, changed all the marketing and started talking to the people in the community about coming in to work out, and slowly that started to change. Everything started to change. Now, when the new center opened at the university, I remember, I'll never forget it, because the television station from the newspaper came down and said, so the university is opening up a fitness center that could basically take all your members away. Are you going to be lowering your prices? They stick a microphone in my face. I said, no. I said, how can I lower the price? What, I got to do, pay everybody to join? I said, I'll have to raise prices. I mean, if we're going to get less people. And we did, so the company stayed strong, but for about 2.5 years, our number of members dropped down, but then it started building back up again. And everything was going really well, and they announced they were opening up a bigger one, even closer. And, one of the things I've learned, and a lot of you will see, if people perceive you to be successful, there are some people that are not exactly happy for you. And the thing that I've learned about people who are not happy for someone else's success is because they can never see their own. So therefore, they don't like that you are. But anyway, I never see myself as being successful. I see myself as working toward becoming successful. But when they were opening up the new place bigger, I remember some people saying, well, what are you going to do now? I go, I'll build a bigger, better one. I remember it would stun them. Well, see, this land was all available up here. There was nothing but trees and all. And I said, well, who owns that land up there? And they told me, a guy by the name of Jack Bevel. They said, but he'll never sell it to you. And he won't sell it to anybody. So I called him up, and I went and I talked with him. And I talked with him for 14 days straight. And at the end of the 14 days, I said, I'd like to make you an offer on your land. So I made an offer. And he said, he goes, Joe, I can't do it. And I said, Jack, first of all, it's been an honor to get to know you. You're a great guy. I said, I just want to thank you for the time, that you spent with me. And he goes, well, it was very nice meeting you, too. And I hung up the phone, and the only thought that went through my mind at that point was, please call back. Please call back. And I sat there, and 10 minutes later, he called me back. He said, I think we can make it work. And that was the beginning of building this center. So anyway, obviously, we've never stopped working on trying to get better. And as you know, this room that you're sitting in here in 6 months won't look anything like this room that you're sitting in here, but neither will the front of the building or the whole downstairs or the locker rooms or anything else. So it's a process of always trying to get better. But I'll tell you the thing that has always driven me, just so you know, when I'm working on the design, because when we're done here, then we'll go to the Women's Center and start working on that center. But this is what I've always told my staff. I said, when I was a little kid, a teenager, I used to caddy at the local country club in our hometown. Now, my family could never be members of the country club, but it didn't matter. It was like I wasn't jealous of anything. That's how I made money, during the summer. But when I was 21 years old, I remember when I wrote down not only my own health club in Gainesville, I said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to build a health club that's like a country club for the average person. So anybody could afford, to be a member. So that's always been the driving force. And actually, where we're going to next is actually the realization of what I thought when I was 21, because we're not there yet, but we will be. We will be there. So, once again, we'll continue to keep working better. But the one thing I just got to go back and tell you about that. Remember that list that I put together? Well, when I was 24, obviously I did the first thing, which was to own my own health club. But I'll tell you what really caught my attention. I had the fourth thing on the list was by the time I'm 25 years old, I will make $100,000. I put that on. But when I was 21, I made $10,000. When I was 22, I made $10,500. When I was 23, I made $11,000. And I'm still reading my list. And I remember I actually put a line through 100,000 and I put 60,000. And when I was 24, I read this big, thick book called The Laws of Success. And I said, no, I copped out. Everything says you're just supposed to believe it. So I went back and I put a line through 60,000. I mean, like 1 year away. And I put 100,000. I had no idea. But the interesting thing was this. The day that I turned 26 years old, I had exactly $100,000 in my savings account. And then, the thing when I saw that, I thought, it's not 99, it's not 101. It was the exact number I wrote down. I said, what I read is true. I can do anything. I remember that's what went through my head. And, continue on doing the things to build the company up. But by the time I was 32, I had finished every single thing, on that list. So I just know that it's possible, but it all started out with pulling the book, The Power of Positive Thinking. And it's something that you don't make fun of. You just learn how to do it. And it was funny, because I'll tell you something that's just funny. There was one thing on there that I put down on my list, was that I would have a home I said ocean, but I actually said water. And the reason I said water was because there was a lake, one of the Finger Lakes up by my hometown, called Keuka Lake. And as a kid, it was the most beautiful lake. But once I got here, I thought, because that's where really I thought. But when I got down here, I said, no, that's too far away. It would have to be the ocean. But it was so funny, because I was telling a group of friends about how beautiful it was up there. And I was laughing about this today, because I said, come on, I'm going to take you all up to New York. I rented a cottage on that Keuka Lake. Everybody from, even their kids, I brought them all up. And it was like spectacular. So ever since then, like every day, I get what's for sale on Keuka Lake. And I was laughing about it today, thinking that was really the original one. And now every day I'm looking at a new picture of a new place that's on the market, on Keuka Lake. And I know it's just a matter of time. But I'm just telling you, if there's anything that you get out of this, what you got to do is just get away from everything and just dream about your life, and then write it down, and then read it. Because what I learned was, a lot of times I'd watch people, before I owned my own company. I wouldn't put up with it now. But back then, I'd watch people not working very hard. They'd be just wasting a lot of time. I remember I used to look at people and say, why don't people work harder? And then it came to me. They don't have a list. So they're just there, right? They're just there until it's time to go home. But when you have a list, then you have these things caught in your brain. And I'll just finish off with this. I told you I've done a lot of reading, and there's all kinds of quotes that are in my head, because I had lots and lots of quotes in these books I was reading. But once again, when I was 21, there was a quote in a book, and I read it, and said you could build a whole company off of this. And it simply said, if you help enough people get what they want out of life, you'll get everything you want out of life. And I looked at that and I said, that's what it's all about. So we just have to figure out how to help enough people. Don't worry about yourself. You'll be taken care of. You don't have to worry about it. Just help as many people as you can. And that's the whole foundation of our company. Are we perfect? No. Do we work on being perfect? Yes. And anyway, thank you all very much for attending today.